Hello, fifth graders. Today we are going to be doing lesson 16 of Unit 5, addition and subtraction. So we're continuing to work with our decimal operations. We're going to use place value strategies to add and subtract decimals. So here's our number talk. All right, so 2 and 57 hundredths minus 2 and 55 hundredths. I know that the difference between 7 and 5 is only 2 hundredths. So I think that the answer is going to be 2 hundredths, right? Because if I take 5 away from 7, I get 2. 5 away from 5, I get 0. And 2 away from 2, I get 0. All right, so for this one, I think I'm going to have to write it down. I could just count up, couldn't I? I could say 49 and then count up to 57. We could do that. 49, 50, right? 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57. So that would be 8 hundredths. So let me show you what I was thinking of, right? 2 and 49 hundredths, and we're subtracting that from 2 and 57 hundredths. So I'm just counting up from 49 to get to 57. And I think it's 8 hundredths. But let's go ahead and borrow and subtract and see, right? So I'm going to have to borrow from the 5 to make this 17 and this 4 because I cannot take 9 from 7. So 17 minus 9 is 8. 4 minus 4 is 0. And 2 minus 2 is 0 as well. So yeah, that worked. That counting up method did work. Okay. All right. This one is going to take, let's see, how should we do this one? I can add 1 to this and make that 100 or 1 whole, right? If I add 100th to that, I could get 1 whole. And then, yeah, if I think about it that way, right? 2 and 57 hundredths. If I added 1 to this, 100th, and take 100th away from this, I would get 2 and 56 hundredths. And if I add that 1 that I took away to the 99 hundredths, that means I'm just subtracting 1 whole. So I think it's going to be 1 and 56 hundredths, Miss Lemoyne. 56 hundredths. Did that make sense? Maybe 58 hundredths. Let's go ahead and subtract that one because I don't think that one's making sense in my head as I did it. So let's go ahead and subtract that one. All right, so it's going to be a lot of borrowing, I think. Let's see, 2 and 57 hundredths minus 99 hundredths. So if I take 1 away from, we did that already, right? We did 49, so I had to take 1 away from here and make that a 4, and that's a 17, so that's 8. So I'm going to take 1 away from here, that's a 1, and that becomes a 14. So 14 minus 9 is 5, and 1 minus, yeah. So I was thinking about it wrong. It's 1 and 58 hundredths. All right, and now we're going to take 59 hundredths away from 2 and 57 hundredths. Let's go ahead and work that. 2 and 57 hundredths minus 59 hundredths. We can borrow 1 from the 5 and make that a 4, and that becomes a 7. So that's 8. I'm going to borrow 1 from that, and that's a 14, so that's a 9. And we get 1 and 98 hundredths. I'm sure there's a way you could do that mentally, but for me, with subtraction, I need to write it out. All right, so that's our warm-up. Now that we know and reminded ourselves that we have to line up the decimal places, we're going to have to find the differences of all of these. Okay, so I'm going to remind you again, we have to subtract ones from ones, tenths from tenths, and hundredths from hundredths. So I'm going to put number 1 here. 7 and 35 hundredths minus 2 and 6 tenths. There are no hundredths in that number, so I'm going to put a 0 here. 5 minus 0 is 5. I'm going to borrow 1 from the 7 and make it a 6 so that I could subtract 13 minus 6 is 7. 7. Bring that decimal point down nice and dark. And then 6 minus 2 is 4. And I am going to take the time to check my work by doing 4 and 75 hundredths plus 2 and 60 hundredths. 6 and 7 is 13. And 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, I checked my work, and the answer to this one is 4 and 75 hundredths. Let's move on to number 2. I'm going to get 108 tenths. Make sure I have a nice dark decimal point. And I'm going to line up those decimal points. So my decimal point here, in front of the decimal point is a 6, and behind it is a 3. Now for this one, I'm going to have to add a 0, and I'm going to have to do some decomposing or borrowing, right? Because I cannot take 3 away from 0. So I'm going to go ahead and get a different color here so that I can show how that works. So I'm going to borrow 1 from the 8 and make it a 7, and that becomes a 10. 10 minus 3 is 7. 7 minus 0 is 7, decimal point. And then I can just say 100. I don't have to borrow because I know that 100 minus 6 will be 94 because 94 plus 6 is 100. And then again, I can 94 and 77 hundredths plus 6 and 3 hundredths and make sure that I get that answer correct, right? I'm going to add to check. 10 and 10. Yes, 94 and 77 hundredths. Okay, here we go with our next one. This is going to be number 3. 26 and 5 tenths. Make sure I put that 13 where it belongs. 62 hundredths. Lining up those place values. I can't subtract this, so I'm going to borrow from the 5 and make it a 4. That becomes 10 minus 2 is 8. I'm going to borrow from the 6 and make it a 5. That becomes 14. So I think 14 minus 6 is also 8. And then I can't borrow. I can. 5 minus 3 is 2. And 2 minus 1 is 1. So again, I'm going to take that 12 and 88 hundredths that I got as my subtraction answer. And I'm going to subtract. I'm going to add to check this time. 13 plus 6,200. 8 and 2 is 10. 8 and 6 and 1 is 15. 3 plus 2 plus 1 is 6. And 1, 2, and 3. It's 6. I don't have to carry. Do not have to carry for that one, right? There we go. 3 plus 2 plus 1 is 6. I don't have any carryover, and it's 26.5. Yes. And so 12 and 88 hundredths is the answer to that one. I'm going to change my ink color one more time and do number 4. This time I have 465, and there is no decimal. So I'm going to add a decimal point because it looks like in this number I'm going to have 2 places behind it. So I'm going to subtract 463 and 14 hundredths. 465 is still bigger than 463 and 1400, even though this has more digits in it, right? Because when we start to compare these numbers, we start all the way from the left. The hundreds are the same, the tens are the same, but the ones have a greater value. So this is bigger than this. It's like saying $465 is more than $465.14. So for this one, I'm going to have to borrow a lot, okay? And that can sometimes be confusing. But it's okay. We can do it. So we're going to borrow 1 from this number, and that becomes a 10. And we borrow 1, it becomes a 9, right? So here's our 10. 10 minus 4 is 6. 9 minus 1 is 8. And I borrowed again because of this would be a 4. 4 minus 3 is 3. So maybe I didn't explain that correctly. Let me do that one more time. Oh, I erased all my work. So 465 and 463 and 14 hundredths. Again, I don't have anything to borrow from here. So I'm going to borrow from over here. That's going to become a 4. That 10, I'm going to borrow and make it a 9. And this is going to become a 10. So 6 8, 1, and then there's nothing I have to subtract from there. So again, I'm going to have to add to just make sure that I borrowed correctly. 463 and 14 hundredths plus 1 and 86 hundredths. 4 and 6 is 10, 8, 9, 10, 5, 6, 7. I have to make sure I have a dark decimal point. I'm sorry, 3, 4, 5, and that's a 6 and a 4. And yes, I started with that, so that's what I ended up with, and that is the correct answer. Okay. How did you find the value of the difference? Well, we worked that out together, so you saw how I did it, right? Here's another one. This one was a little bit more difficult, right? I used the standard algorithm, lining up those decimal places. It's very important that we make sure that we have all the decimal places lined up, and then when we break down that we understand how we're doing it. All right, so here's some more sums and differences. We have to make sure that we understand what we're doing and when we're doing it. So the first thing we're going to do is subtract. We're going to line up those decimal places. 36 and 51 hundredths minus 4 and 3 tenths. I'm going to put a 0 here so that I don't get myself mixed up. 1 minus 0 is 1. 5 minus 3 is 2. Bring down that decimal point. 4 minus 6, or 6 minus 4 is 2. So 32 and 21 hundredths. I'm going to go ahead and add to check. 32 and 21 hundredths plus 4 and 3 tenths. 3 and 2 is 5. Make sure I have my decimal. 2 and 4 is 6. And so I started with 36 and 51 hundredths, and I ended with that. So this is the correct answer, 32 and 21 hundredths. This next problem is an addition problem. And I don't even think I need to work that one out on the side because I know 100 plus 31 is going to be 131. And I don't have any tenths or hundredths to add to the 5 hundredths. So I think my answer is going to be that. Ooh, now I have to subtract. So now I'm going to really have to show my work. So here we go. 3 is 100 minus 31 and 5 hundredths. So I'm going to have to make sure I have a decimal point and line them up. And I'm going to have to borrow a lot for that one, aren't I? So I'm going to have to go all the way out here and borrow from all of these until this becomes a 0. This is going to become a 9, 9, 9, and that's going to become a 10. 10 minus 5 is 5. That's going to be a 9. 9 minus 1 is 8. 9 minus 3 is 6. And again, I'm going to add to check. So 68 and 95 hundredths plus 31 and 5 hundredths. Well, 95 plus 5, I know that's going to be 5 plus 5 is 10. That's going to be 10 as well. 8, 9, 10. 6 plus 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10. So I did get the correct answer. So add to check. It's super, super important. And then the last one is an addition problem, and I cannot do that one in my head, so I am going to write it down, and we'll write the number of the problem here. And I'm going to make sure that the decimal places line up. So there we are. I'm going to add a 0 to the hundredths place so that I can add 3 plus 0 is 3. 4 plus 9 is 13. Make sure I have a nice dark decimal point. And I have 5 and 6 is 11, plus 1 is 12. 6 and 7 is 13, plus 1 is 14. 2 plus 1 is 3. So 342 and 33 hundredths is the answer to number 4. All right, let's move on to the synthesis. Why is subtracting by place value a good strategy for this expression? I can take 4 from 6 and 3 tenths from 5 tenths, and that gives me 32 and 21 hundredths. Does the standard algorithm work as well? Absolutely. There we are. We had no borrowing to do, so that one was pretty easy. How did you find the value of 100 minus 31 and 5/100ths? I used the standard algorithm. It was a lot of borrowing, so it was hard, but I did try to do that, and it did end up working. The standard algorithm always works to find sums and differences, but sometimes the other methods might make it easier. Yeah, that's how they did the standard algorithm for 100 minus 31 and 5/100ths. It was very difficult, but I did it. All right. Here we have subtraction with larger numbers. This is just more practice, so let's try it again. The more practice we get, the better off we are. So 43 and 14/100ths minus 18 and 6/10ths. Remember, I'm lining up those decimal points. 4 minus 0 is 4. I cannot take 6 from 1, so I'm going to have to borrow from that 3 and make it a 2. So 11 minus 6 is 5. It's a good idea to have paper with lines on them so we can turn it to the side and use those lines to help us organize our work. I'm going to have to borrow from the 4 and make it a 3. So that becomes 8 minus 12. I think it's 4, and 3 minus 1 is 2. I'm going to add to check. 4 plus 0 is 4. This is 11. 8, 9 plus 4 is 13. And 2 plus 1 plus 1 is 4. So that should be the correct answer, 24 and 54/100ths. So now I'm going to do number 2. Let me get pink out. There we go. Here we go. Number 2, 73 and 3/10ths minus 52 and 99/100ths. I'm going to have to add a 0 here. So here's where I have to remember that 0 minus 9 is not 9, right? I cannot take 9 from 0. So I'm going to have to borrow from the 3 and make it a 2, and that becomes a 10. 10 minus 9 is 1. I can't take 9 from 2, so I'm going to have to borrow from this 3 and make it a 2, and that's going to become a 12. To make sure I have my decimal point out. 12 minus 9 is 3. 2 minus 2 is 0, and 7 minus 5 is 2. And then again, I'm going to take that answer and add it to what I subtracted and make sure that the answer is correct. 9 plus 1 is 10. 9 plus 1 is 10, plus 3 is 13. Decimal point, that's a 3, and that is a 7. And yes, I started with 73 and 30/100ths, so 20 and 31/100ths is correct. And I'm learning how to write again. Okay. My next number I'm going to do in blue. I'm going to do number 3, 128 and 44/100ths minus 62 and 57/100ths. Again, there's going to be some borrowing and a lot of it, right? So I'm going to borrow 1 from this 4 and make it a 3, and that becomes a 14. 7 minus 14 is 7. I can't take 5 from 3, so I'm going to borrow 1 from this 8 and make it a 7, and that becomes 13. 13 minus 5 is 8. Make sure I have a nice dark decimal point. 7 minus 2 is 5. And then I can think of this as 12 instead of borrowing. Think of it as 12 because I don't have a number here. 12 minus 6 is 6. So again, I'm going to take 65 and decimal point 87/100ths and 62 and 57/100ths and add to make sure that I did it correctly. 7 plus 7 is 14. 8 plus 1 is 9 plus 5 is 14. Decimal point, carry my 1. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 6 and 6 is 12. So I did start with 128 and 44/100ths, so my answer should be 65 and 87/100ths as I checked it. All right, moving on to number 4. 261 25/100ths minus 260 and 7/10ths. Making sure to line up those decimal places. 5 minus 0 is 5. I cannot take 7 from 2, so I'm going to borrow 1 from this 1 and make it a 0. And that means 12 minus 7. And I think that is also 5. 0 minus 0 is 0. 6 minus 6 is 0. And 2 minus 2 is 0. So the answer to this one, I think, is 55 hundredths. So let's make sure that's correct by adding 260 and 7 tenths plus 55, and I have to make sure that those decimal points lined up, hundredths. 5 plus 0 is 5. 7 plus 5 is 12. That's a 1. Nice dark decimal point. 6 and 2. And yes, that's what I started out with, so there is my answer. Whew, that was a lot of work, but if you work carefully, you can do it. Good job, boys and girls. What estimate would you make for the value of this expression? Well, if I were estimating this, I would say 43, pencil, there we go, 43 minus 20, which would be 13. And then how did I find the value of that expression? I actually lined up my decimal points. I used the standard algorithm, right? The standard algorithm. Oh, that would be 23, sorry, 23. I knew that didn't look right. So I actually lined them up, and then I used the standard algorithm to do it, right? Okay, let's see what else they have for us. Why did you use the standard algorithm? Well, the numbers are complicated, so I can't see what the difference is by just looking at it, so I had to do it. Did my answer make sense based on my estimate? Yeah, my answer I think was 24 and 54 hundredths, and that was very close to 23. All right, 261 and 25 hundredths minus 260 and 7 tenths. How did you, I used the standard algorithm again to find the value of that expression. Can you do it mentally? Maybe. I could not. I could add 3 tenths to the 7. It would be really difficult for me to do that mentally. I have to write it down. All right. We found sums and differences of decimals today using a lot of different techniques. What are some different methods that you can use to find the difference? I can subtract 4 ones from 6 ones and 4 tenths from 5 tenths. I can add on 4 and 3 tenths. First I added 32, and then 2 tenths, and then 1/100th. Or I can use the algorithm, which is my favorite way to do it. Okay, here's our cool down. We have 2 subtraction problems to solve. So we have 75 and 2 tenths. And remembering to line up my decimal place, 4 ones and 37 hundredths. I'm going to add a 0 there. So when I subtract, I'm going to have to borrow 1 from the 2 and make that a 1 and that a 10. 10 minus 7 is 3. I cannot take 3 from 1, so I'm going to borrow 1 from the 5 and make that a 4, and that becomes an 11. And I think 8, 9, 10, 11, yes. 11 minus 3 is 8. Bring down my decimal point. 4 minus 4 is 0, and 7 minus nothing is 7. Again, I'm going to check my work by adding. 7 and 3 is 10. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 4 plus 1 is 5, decimal point, and a 7. And yes, 70 and 83 hundredths is the correct answer. For this one, again, I'm going to have to make sure that I write down my decimal points in the right place. Subtract the ones from the ones and the tens from the tens. Okay, so 7 minus 5 is 2. 8 minus 1 is 7. 6 minus 2 is 4. And I don't have anything to subtract for this one. Again, just to make sure, because I could probably do this one in our head, I'm going to add to check. So I think that's my answer. 5 plus 2 is 7. 7 plus 1 is 8. 4 plus 2 is 6. And I don't have anything to add to that. And that is correct. All right. Okay, boys and girls, adding and subtracting decimals can be easy and fun, We just have to make sure that we are practicing correctly, right? That we're lining up and using those decimal points. I have to really pay attention to those in order to be able to add or subtract. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I hope to see you again on lesson 17. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos.